people don't know at all, but when Jesus came and did what he did on the cross and he rose from the grave, he did a lot more than just, saving us from our sin and making eternal relationship with the Father. He made us perfect in the sight of the Father. And so when God sees us, when we approach him or we think about approaching him, he doesn't see all our suckiness that we have heaped on ourselves. And he sees us through the filter of his son's precious, perfect, sinless blood, and he sees us as righteous and perfect and beautiful, and we don't have to worry about all that stuff we're carrying, because he sees us like he sees Jesus, because we are adorned with what Jesus came to impart to us. And it's the same, as we feel about our kids. When they approach us, we're not like, well, you did this today. We're just glad they're there, and we love them, and we want better for them, but we never want to deny them access to us or anything like that. So I think people forget that a lot of times. We are as good as Jesus walking up to the Father.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. And like a couple of years ago, after I was walking through a season of depression, I just my mind was just all over the place and not good, and I was coming out of that, and I was writing in my journal again about how much shame I felt and how condemned I was feeling. And I was reading in the Bible that that passage about where the Pharisees brought that woman to Jesus's feet at the temple, and she was an adulterous woman, and they were like, whatever, wanting Jesus to condemn her and or do something, and Jesus said, let he without sin cast the first stone. And I remember reading the next parts where everybody kind of walks away from the oldest to the youngest, because the younger ones tend to, I think sometimes we tend to think that we're like, we're just not as wise or self-aware. But then it's like, he's like, hey lady, like, where'd everybody go? And and she was like, they left, they're all gone. And he was like, neither do I condemn you. And it was like in that moment, when I was reading, I literally, I promise you, like, it was like Jesus whispered in my ear, and I could hear the Holy Spirit. And it wasn't like I was reading that story. It was like Jesus was telling me, like, neither do I condemn you, Gabby. So like, stop condemning yourself, because I'm not condemning you, and let's just keep moving forward. And I think you're right, it keeps us from feeling like I don't deserve to talk to Jesus, and I don't deserve to have my prayers answered. But it's not about that.
No. I've often thought, if we could see ourselves through the eyes of the Father and how Jesus feels about us, and our perspectives would be so much different. And you and I talked a lot about perspective just a little bit ago, and we talked about lenses and filters. And I think sometimes, just like you would an old-timey camera, you've got to change your lens, and you've got to start seeing things through a positive filter, and it will really change the way you feel inside, the way you feel about yourself, the way you see other people. One of the greatest messages I think that Pastor Trevor ever preached, and that really hit me, was that we talk about all this awe and wonder of creation, but we rarely look at each other in that same just awestruck way that makes us love one another and see past faults. And it's the same thing with kind of what's going on right now. We can choose our filter and our lenses, and it's easier for some of us to be positive right now if you're still getting a paycheck and the bank isn't calling and things like that. But we can also begin to look at each other differently during this, and we can begin to choose what filters that we're placing on our lives. What are we allowing into our lives? How are we feeding fear right now? How are we feeding the doom that seems just to loom around us, and that yoke that sits on us? You mentioned that feeling of heaviness. And I've decided I always want to be a well-informed citizen and things like that, but I'm not going to listen to the news all day. I check in, I make sure I know what's going on, what the latest recommendations are. But other than that, I'm staying as oblivious and positive as I can. And I can choose to do that. And the less I have allowed myself to ingest, the less that I have fed the fear and the anxiety and things like that. And I think that we forget that we have the power to do that. And fear is a real enemy. And one way to battle that is prayer and perspective and things like that, seeing things through the eyes of Jesus, seeing ourselves and the power that we have and the weapons that we have through our Father that sent Jesus to give them to us. We just get so out of focus sometimes.
Yeah, I think we do get to choose where our thoughts are going to go. Like, we do get to choose if we're going to, we know that we need to be informed, but we also know that we each have this threshold,
Right.
where we can be informed, but then we can just kind of go over the edge and just dive into fear and dive into panic and just a free fall.
Yeah.
And we have that choice of, I'm going to go to the threshold that I'm informed, and that's it. Like, that's it, because I need to be informed so that I can pray and I can do my part.
Yeah.
I can help others in that way, and I can be effective. But there is a threshold where you can just go and jump straight into panic and fear, and we get to choose. We get to choose that, of how far we're going to go into that, and if we're going to dive in, or if we're going to go to be informed and then come to God in prayer.
Right. Yeah. And just sometimes I wake up and say, you're not coming in my house today. And
Yeah.
I just don't, and I really have been feeling a lot less heavy, a lot more living the blessed life, the abundant life that Jesus came to give us. To add to the things he did for us on the cross, as far as eternal relationship, he came to give us an abundant life, not a life full of fear and just all this that comes at us all the time. We can live joyous, but talking about taking your thoughts captive, you have to choose sometimes what you allow. And I think sometimes too, we know that loneliness and mental health, it's all going to be a big issue right now.
Yeah.
And we're not all blessed to be cooped up with an awesome family and having great moments together and feeling safe and at least feeling loved. This is awful for some people. I think about a lot of my students, and I really hate that they're stuck where they're stuck. So I won't talk about that anymore. But that loneliness that a lot of people feel, even if it's in the midst of chaos, we can go to God in prayer and feel that presence of his. And even, if you're sitting beside your drunk husband or an abusive mother, if you can begin to remember that you have access to God the Father, and that you can call on Jesus, and that he calls you a friend and he loves you, you can begin to feel his presence right beside you. And that loneliness can be lifted and filled during those times. We forget that.
And too, for those of us who want to do something who can't, or we see those kids, or we see those women or those men who are in these cooped up in these awful situations now and don't seem like they can get out. Like, we can't be there with them, but we have access to the one who can.
Right.
And we may not be able to be there physically with them. And now I'm going to cry. Gosh, Tonya.
I brought that up.
But we can go to the one who is there with them, and we can go on their behalf, and we can pray for them, and we can pray that they feel his peace, that they feel his love, that they feel his arms. And I'm going to stop. Gosh.
Anyway, sorry.
No, but it's so true. That's another thing. It's not just wages and employment and businesses shutting down. It's people trapped in something, but they're not. Like they do have God there with them, and we can pray on their behalf that they would feel him and that they would feel his presence. And it's a huge thing. We have a huge, powerful weapon at our disposal that we often aren't using.
Mm-hmm.
And now is the time. Like